So in my household last week, we did something that we had never done before as a family. And we had to get up very early, and one of us was very nervous. But we did it. We got up early, and we got everything together, and we walked to kindergarten. Oh, she was fine. I was not. It was really early. 7:45 is start time in our district. And the big kids were out on their bicycles, and we had to figure out which way to go. And at first, they let nervous parents like me in to the classroom. But about Wednesday, they kicked me out. And so Friday morning, I walked to school, and I walked to the front door, and then I stood there at the end of this very long hallway. And I watched my daughter in this huge backpack. You know, the backpack is bigger than her. It's like 4 times as big as her head. This big backpack, little legs, walk all the way down the hall. And then I went home alone to my very, 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 very quiet house. And I had Stevie Nicks' Landslide in my head the whole time. You know, I've been afraid of changing because I built my life around you. Time makes you bolder, children get older. I'm getting older too, so take this love. Take it down. They say that these changes of life just happen, you know? And you're supposed to somehow open your hands. Our children grow up, and our parents die, and then we too. And the world around us changes so much. And sometimes it really does not feel gentle or natural. It feels like the man in the poem about the sunflower with the big metal teeth attacking me. Because sometimes we lose our children way too soon. And sometimes the changes that are happening in our world, sometimes the changes that are happening now, are ones of destruction and brokenness and not natural healing and growth. Somebody shared an article with me online this week about forest fires and how a fire is really essential to replenish the earth. And I was like, I mean, maybe, right? But it's hard when I can't breathe the air to embrace the Eagle Creek fire. It's hard to see some good out of that massive change because, of course, I think of all the animals too. Well, in her book, Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown talks about this idea of intentional adaptation. And what she says is that change happens no matter what we plan or expect or hope for. But how we live and grow and stay purposeful in the face of constant change determines the quality of our lives and what we're able to do in terms of action moving forward. How we live and grow and stay purposeful. Some of the changes are really exciting. I mean, I look at the Black Lives Matter movement and Idle No More and the movement for immigrant rights, and I see a big swelling of change for growth and healing. New ways of being in the world. And new confidence and accountability from our young people. That those movements are so inclusive too. All genders, all sexualities. It's rooted in this critique of the world that is very broad. And when I see that movement, I think again of the sunflower poem because I see also those who were like the gardener who were trying to keep that manicured lawn, right? Trying to control what blooms and where and how. So I think of the 800,000 young adults who are at risk of deportation because of DACA and because we don't have a DREAM Act. People who went to kindergarten, who grew up here, got their first job, our parents, teachers, nurses, lawyers. And so I stand with our dreamers, and I declare that they are here to stay. And in another narrative frame, we might tell the story of that change a little bit differently, right? I don't know about you, but when I was in U.S. history class in California, I was taught about this very important war called the Mexican-American War of 1848. Anybody know the Mexican-American War of 1848? The only one? Right, of course. And so before this war, the people that lived here, a lot of them, there was the indigenous First Nations people, but also a lot of people from Mexico. And then we had 1848, and we had the war, and a bunch of people went into exile, and we had mass deportations in the 30s and since. And so those of us who came into this land as citizens built laws to keep the exiles out. And so we might look at this conversation about immigration and being undocumented as exiles returning home, to rightful home, right? There's a quote that often gets quoted. It's by a Greek poet, but it says, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." They didn't know we were seeds. And in fact, we have stories about exile and return in our own scriptures. And in those, we're always on the side of those who have been in exile, the refugees who are coming back. It's difficult. And every time I talk about colonization and exile and returning the land that was stolen, I hear, well, where are we supposed to go? I'm German, but we Europeans, we can't go back to where we came from. We aren't willing to refugee ourselves for the sake of justice. It is terrifying to be a seed and to be cast into the wind. But Dr. Estes says that we are children of the vastly lit solar system, that we were created by the magnitude, in the image of the magnitude. And so I think if there is a lesson in the sunflower, it's that our natural state is justice and joy. Whatever metal teeth come at us, whatever changes that are destructive come our way, the natural change is always toward justice. Our path is always towards love. And in our scripture this morning from the Hebrews, we learn about a changing relationship with God that echoes that. It's a little challenging. Some people have used this passage to say, oh, the old ways that pass away, that means that the Jewish faith is obsolete. And I absolutely do not support that interpretation. In fact, this passage is a quote from the prophet Jeremiah. So even though it shows up in the Christian portion of the Bible, it's the prophet Jeremiah who wrote 600 BC. He's a prophet in both Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And he has that beautiful promise, I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. 2 weeks ago, you called out your names for God, which showed me that you do have a God that you have claimed that is yours, and it's not the one that somebody handed to you. I will put my laws in their minds. God's laws, as we know them, are to love God with your whole heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. And those laws live in our cells, and we pass them on from one generation to the next. And then there's that important piece that Elizabeth read about how we wouldn't teach one another, right? We wouldn't have to say, this is who God is, this is how it works. We don't need an expert or a guru in order to know God. We know God directly. All of us from the greatest to the least. Some translations say from the least important to the most, or from the little children to the elders. So I have a little story about how I've seen that work, this changing God. I was at Camp Adams last July, and I was the official camp pastor for the 4th and 5th graders. The counselors in the cabins for the kids were all recent high school graduates. So they had been at camp, they graduated, and in order to come back, you can be a counselor. So they met with me my first night, and they said, okay, look, you're terrific and all, but this is how it's gonna go. When you do evening prayer, this is how it has to work. We have to walk down this way, and then we get to the bridge, and then it has to be complete silence, and then we walk over the bridge. And they led me through it. And they were really respectful, but also very serious. They told me it 3 times to make sure that I would not mess it up. It was wonderful. It's wonderful, right? Because it doesn't matter what degree I have, they know how to approach the holy in the forest, right? They know because they were there last summer and the summer before and the summer before. And they are so careful to hold that and to offer that to the next group of kids. I told them they were guardians of the magic. And I believe it changes a little bit, right? Because it's different kids every year. And yet there's a through line, right? There's a through line that they can feel even if they don't have all of the big fancy words to describe it. But they were so intent because they didn't want the next group of kids to miss it. It's more obvious when you're in the forest, maybe. But I think that every time we get together and we do this, we create God in a new way. God is new with us, right? Because we need something different. Our hearts connect with a different word or a different phrase. And the paradox is the through line is the same. The through line is that call, right? To be beloved community, to be love for all people. Change is all around us. And while we grow in different soil and we struggle towards the light, we are always making manifest the magnitude, the one in whose image we are made. So I'd like to invite us to do, you've done this before, not with me, but you've done this before. I'd like to invite us to take a minute. I'd like you just to reflect for yourself and think, how has your experience of God, the mystery, how has that changed? How has that changed? Maybe over the course of your life, or just in the last year? How has your experience of God changed? And what's the new part that's calling to you? Just a moment to think. You might want a little more time, but part 2, I'm going to invite you to talk to a person near you, if you don't mind. If you don't want to, you can write, but I'm going to give us 5 minutes. Just find somebody near you and share briefly, how did your experience of God changed? It's a really short time. You'll only have 1 paragraph of sentences. But share with the person next to you, how did your experience of God change, and what's the new part of God that's calling you? I'll ring the bell to bring us back. Thank you so much for sharing with one another. We don't often do that, but it's nice to be together. I'm so grateful for this community and for all of the ways that it holds us in our changes. I know that I am not the first mother to pretend not to cry at the door of kindergarten and then to sob all the way home. And I come here to this church to remember that I am not alone in my life. And I am not alone in my longing to know the mystery. I am not alone in my longing for a better future, a better community for the next generation. We are held in the wind of love that sustains us. We seeds, and the law of God's love is within our very DNA, so that while we grow in different soil and struggle toward the light, we are always making manifest the magnitude. For our closing this morning, I'd like to invite you to read in your bulletin the modern testimony with me. And let's start at the top of this page where it says, "Do not." Let's start there, and we'll read it together as a blessing on ourselves and on each other as we encounter change in the day ahead and as we seek to bring healing and wholeness. Do not think yourself into being small, insignificant, powerless. Do not listen to that devil. You are a child of this vastly lit solar system, and we were created by the magnitude, in the image of the magnitude. This we are promised, that we are vast and like the stars, enduring in sending our lights to earth. Go to your work now. I love you. You know the ways forward. A seed is tiny and it is mighty because it does not depend on being planted. By various means, a seed ever has wings. Don't forget, you too. Amen.